Hi, my name is Madeline Smith, and this is for CAA number 3, History of ESL Education. I started my timeline in 1954, the Brown v. Board of Education. Um, the Brown v. Board of Education Act was primarily to outlaw the segregation and unequal education in schools. Um, this was later into the 1970s. It was re-brought up uh, because it was claimed that this law was focused on the desegregation of African Americans and was children who only spoke English. This excluded the outlaw of segregation based on all ethnicity and language. That's why it was re-brought up and tweaked a little bit to help that. I then went on to talk about the National Defense Education Act of 1954. This is an education act in response to the Sputnik from the Soviet Union. This increased the school system's use of academics of math, science, and foreign language, which obviously helped bilingual education because they finally enhanced the strength and enforced foreign language education. In 1964, there was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and this followed up on the Brown v. Board of Education because it banned the discrimination of race, sex, and national origin in public facilities, aka schools, so that they couldn't discriminate against the children who did not speak English because they came from a different origin or country. I then talk about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which was a law that enforced equal academic needs to the poorer income children. It was said that most Native or immigrated families were lesser on the income scale, and so by enforcing this, it helped all children be able to get an equal education, whether they were poor or rich. The Bilingual Education Act of 1968, on January 2nd of 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson passed this act. This act commits to assist students with limited English skills by authorizing resources to support bilingual programs, train teachers and teacher aides, develop specific instructional material, and encourage parental involvement in academics. The focus was on the lower income families and the educational disadvantage that students who didn't speak English had with not being able to understand the given criteria. For this, a lot of students were, not doing well, failing because they couldn't understand what was given to them. And with this, it allowed special programs for them, probably the same criteria, but different instructional materials and methods in which they could understand it better with their language, and to be able to train teachers in bilingual language, and so that they could help teach the children who didn't speak English, they could help teach English with them, therefore creating bilingual. This also did increase the political participation of Spanish-speaking Americans, so more cases were being brought up with discrimination of children who couldn't speak English and discrimination on schools that weren't participating in these things with the programs, and giving the teachers proper training and just helping the children in any way they could to help them succeed academically. More Spanish-speaking Americans were trying to get involved with this political stuff as they were noticing these different cases. A case that was brought up was the Lau v. Nichols in 1974, and this is a prominent case because it helped provide bilingual education for more than just Hispanics, as that was the predominant issue that we were having. A lawyer had noticed students were failing school due to their lack of knowing English, and then that led him to connect with a case, Kidney Law's case, of a child who only spoke Chinese. So they formed this case to not only single out Hispanics but other ethnicities and who were not academically succeeding because they couldn't understand the criteria and curriculum that was being taught to them. So in 1974, San Francisco signed this case, and it provided bilingual education for not only Hispanics, but for the Chinese and Filipino children that resided in California. In the Serna versus Portales Municipal Schools in 1974, it was a lawsuit formed from Mexican-American parents for the right of bilingual education in New Mexico. Many students were failing and dropping out due to the lack of bilingual programs in their school systems. The rates that I read about were pretty intense. Many of the students just couldn't understand what they were learning because they didn't speak English, and they had no choice to drop out because they were failing so badly, and they couldn't get their grades up because there was no systems to help them learn English. So this ended with the judge ordering academic instruction in a student's native language so that they would be offered the equal opportunity to succeed as English language learner or English language speakers, as they could actually understand, comprehend, and follow the instructions that were given to them, helping them succeed academically. So in 1978, there was the case Rio versus Reed, and this was a New York school that had been accused of violating the limited English proficient students' rights because they weren't giving them the adequate bilingual programs that were needed, nor did they provide any bicultural components. So when they went into this case, it was discovered that the school had lack of qualified teachers. There was not really any bilingual curriculum, and if there was, they weren't really following the protocols, and the teachers were inadequate to teach the bilingual programs because themselves didn't speak the bilingual language. And so these students weren't even given the opportunity to learn what the other students were learning because they didn't have the correct resources or programs or even teachers to help them succeed with their school. So in the end of this, the school was forced to make these changes so that each student had the equal opportunity to succeed. Regents of University of California v. Bake. This was a case in 1978 where a white 35-year-old male, Alan Bake, or Bach, I don't know how to say that, he applied to the California Medical School of Davis, and he applied twice, and he created this lawsuit because he believed he was being denied due to the few spots that they hold available for the minorities. Every year they hold about 16 spots for the minorities to have a so-called equal opportunity for everyone. And so this was debated through like small courts, large courts, and even the Supreme Court. And in the end he was admitted, but this came to the conclusion that there has to be limited civil rights claims to cases in which intentional discrimination can be proved, because like they were pulling the race card where he couldn't get in because he was white and they exceeded the limit of white people, and there were open spots because not enough minorities were getting into the school, and so they were seeing if this was fair or not. And so, as I said, in the end, this limited the civil rights claims to cases in which only intentional discrimination can be proved. My last one is Castaneda versus Pickard, and this is in 1981. And this was a group of Mexican American children and their parents that complained that the school district was discriminating students by ethnicity. So the classrooms are being separated by race and ethnicity and not by language ability. So this program, so basically, children were just being put into rooms based off of their race or their ethnicity, assuming that a Mexican can only speak Spanish or an Asian can only speak Chinese. And so when they could easily speak English and others couldn't. And so this program led to the 3-prong criteria for an limited English proficient program. So there was the sound educational theory, implemented effectively with adequate sources, and after a trial period, the student must be evaluated as effective in overcoming language handicaps. So they would take students and have them speak, and that's where the staff would come up with if they had speech issues or language issues and how proficient they were in English. So then they would implement a plan with adequate sources if the student could succeed, if they couldn't succeed, how well they spoke English, and then after a trial period they would be evaluated if they were being effective in overcoming these language handicaps. So then that's where they would be based off of, not by race or ethnicity. They would be based off of their proficiency in English. And these are my references, and that was my timeline for the history of ESL education. Thank you.